Hey, welcome in. Well, I've got another article here from Victor Davis Hanson, and it's insightful as always. The guy's really quite brilliant, and I'm a big fan, as I've said in my earlier videos on him. Now, this article was published on January 5th, 2020 in American Greatness magazine, and I think it must have been submitted before Soleimani, before he was killed, because there's no mention in this, but this is still a really great, insightful article regarding the Middle East and what's happening there right now. And the title is, What is the Middle East in the Middle of Anymore? And this is an important question because with U.S. energy independence, well, the Middle East only has one thing, and I'm not talking about hummus. It has oil. And this is not as crucial of a matter for the United States anymore, unless it's just simply having your hand on the tap, which in itself is a great deal of power. But the question is at this point, does that make the U.S. stronger or weaker? And if somebody else had their hand on the tap, say China, would that make them stronger or weaker? I'm not sure it's clear. Anyway, let's get into this. The United States is trying to square a circle, remaining strong and deterring dangerous elements, but to do so for U.S. interests that increasingly seem to be fewer and fewer in the Middle East. Since World War II, the United States have been involved in a series of crises and wars in the Middle East on the premise of protecting U.S., Western, or global interests, or purportedly all three combined. Since antiquity, the Middle East has been the hub of three continents and of three great religions, and the maritime intersection between the East and West. In modern times, American strategic concerns, in no particular order, were usually the following. 1. Guaranteeing reliable oil supplies for the U.S. economy. Not so important now. 2. Ensuring that no hostile power, most notably the Soviet Union between 1946 and 1989, and local Arab or Iranian strongmen thereafter, gained control of the Middle East and used its wealth and oil power to disrupt the economies and security of the Western world, Europe in particular. I mean, it's still a worry for Europe. The U.S., not so much. 3. Preventing radical Islamic terrorists from carving out sanctuaries and bases of operations to attack the United States or its close allies. And this is one where, just at least just under the surface, every government there is against the West anyway, particularly the United States. It just seems like this land, I've said this before, it's just this land of unforeseen consequences, where there's never a good solution. It's always the best of a bunch of terrible solutions. But anyway, let's move on. I just wanted to take 1 second to ask you to please subscribe. The big tech algorithms do not like this kind of content, so if you enjoy it and you want more, you pretty much have to subscribe. Also, sharing is really the only way a channel like mine can grow, so please share if you can. Thanks very much. Let's get back to the show. 4. Aiding Israel to survive in a hostile neighborhood. 5. Keeping shipping lanes in the Eastern Mediterranean, the Suez Canal, and the Persian Gulf open and accessible to world commerce at the historical nexus of three continents. 6. To the extent we could articulate our interests, U.S. policy was reductionist and simply deterred any other major power for any reason from dominating the quite distant region. And this is the key part of that sentence there. To the extent we could articulate our interests. Well, I think in the past it was pretty clear. It's about controlling the oil supply. These days, it's not as clear. And it seems like there is a lot of difficulty articulating what the interests really are and how they would benefit normal people. 7. Occasionally, the United States sought to limit or stop the endemic bloodletting of the region. Now, I don't want to sound flippant about this at all, but they seem pretty determined to keep on bloodletting, don't they? It doesn't seem to matter what happens. The sectarian bad blood just runs so deep. And it has for, the last 1,500 years? Really going back to, the beginning of recorded history. But, maybe these fights are just fights that you just really shouldn't get in the middle of. Now, this is important here. But two questions now arise in the 21st century. To what degree do strategic reasons remain for a strong U.S. ground presence in the Middle East? And, in terms of cost-benefit analysis, how much material, human, and psychic U.S. investment is necessary to protect our interests to the extent they still matter in the region? And this is the question I think a lot of people are asking. Does this need a reassessment now? Things have changed. And it's not just the US, there's other countries as well. But should that investment continue just as it has been for decades now? Just because it has. A lot of people are wondering about this. These questions cannot be answered in a short essay, Victor Davis Hanson continues. They are the topics of constant discussions among US planners and offer no easy solutions. That said, our old strategic reasons do not necessarily still apply. And again, a lot of people are asking, they run up a pretty high bar tab out the Middle East. What point do you kind of say, I might have a drinking problem? These are the kind of questions that are being asked. Changing needs new realities. He continues, the United States does not need Middle Eastern natural gas or oil. Europe does. China does even more. Certainly, it may be in the larger economic interests of America to keep moderately priced oil flowing from the Middle East, but disruptions, cartels, and embargoes do not matter to the United States in the degree to which they did in the last century. This reality is especially germane when the European Union, larger and nearly as rich as the United States, simply will not provide for its own security, despite its proximity to the region and its dependence upon it. China likewise freeloads on the U.S. Navy's deterrent presence in the waters off the Middle East. These new realities do not mean we should vacate the region entirely, only that we should be far less likely to intervene when others have far more at stake. Given the size, complexity, factions, and violence of the Middle East, all outside would-be hegemons have had a difficult time consolidating power there. The Soviet Union failed. It is no exaggeration to state that nearly every foreign power that has had a base in the region was eventually kicked out of it, with the exception so far of the United States and the Gulf. Contemporary Russia does not have the resources to control the region and can only agitate and offend others rather than consolidate a lucrative position. China's Belt and Road Initiative in the Middle East, if it follows the paradigm in Africa and elsewhere in the Mediterranean, likely will not pencil out. And he makes a good point here. Russia has an economy about that of Italy. They've got a ton of nukes. That makes them powerful. And he says that China is freeloading. And I wonder, that you have to wonder, does it make them stronger or ultimately weaker? The U.S.'s big rival in the world is China. If China controlled that oil and had to invest that, like $100 billion a year to be the policeman in the region, would that make them stronger or weaker? I don't know. I don't know the answers to these questions. I'm just asking questions I think a lot of people are asking. War weariness. He continues, finally, there are much neglected but powerful emotional and human factors. We hear nonstop that the Arab or the Iranian or the Muslim world at large does not like the West in general, and the United States in particular. For some 60 years, American television screens have blared out nightly images of crowds of screaming fanatics with signs of hatred of America, almost all of them, when emotions subside, otherwise eager to claim some sort of fast-track victim or refugee status to get into the country they say they despise. That brings to mind somebody like Ilhan Omar, doesn't it? Because people from that region do want to get into the United States. They absolutely do. When we say Americans are tired of endless wars, the subtext is that we are mostly sick of the Middle East. We don't necessarily see any benefit from welcoming in tens of thousands of refugees from the region, many of whom do not necessarily seem to appreciate Western religious diversity, ecumenical traditions, and multiracial and gender equality, and will likely upon arrival lodge complaints against the United States for some ism or ology that they have levered from the therapeutic left. Is that common? I don't know, but any amount is easily seen as being provocative. Europe's immigration policies are the canaries in the Western mine. Well, things haven't gone very well in Europe. They're having all kinds of problems. And those problems are, the timeline's pretty clear. It's to do with the mass immigration. And we've seen a move to national populism across Europe, even where these parties haven't gotten into power, they've been gaining in popularity. That's a direct response to really irresponsible immigration policies. Anyway, let's end this off. The administration seems intent on avoiding the appeasement of Obama and also the interventionism of the Bush years. So far, it has managed to help destroy ISIS without getting into a shooting war with Turkey over the Kurds or knee-deep in the quagmires of Syria. The administration wants to find a way out of both Iraq and Afghanistan that does not destroy U.S. deterrence, a quest that ultimately depends on how we define deterrence, both regionally and globally. In other words, the United States is trying to square a circle, remaining strong and deterring our dangerous elements, but to do so for U.S. interests that increasingly seem to be fewer and fewer in the Middle East. Or in simpler terms, what exactly is the Middle East in the middle of anymore? So again, why is it as important as it's always been? And this really does put me in the mind of very recent events with, the death of Soleimani, and then Iran's response with the missiles, and then Trump's restraint. And I'm going to do another video later today on Trump's strategy in this and how it's either brilliant or it's just a total fluke. But he always seems to land on his feet. It's quite amazing. But that's going to be for another video. But anyway, these seem to be the sorts of questions that Trump himself is asking. How important is this really? Again, he really has shown a lot of restraint in regards to Iran, and I don't think he has any intention of invading. I mean, if he wanted an excuse, those missile attacks, that was the excuse. Do you think that Hillary wouldn't have? I mean, certainly George Bush. It's a very interesting question, and again, I don't have any perfect answers to any of these. These are super complex issues. But I just have to wonder that if the U.S. were to take a step back and Russia and China were to spend billions upon billions upon billions trying to police the area and control the oil there, or at least keep the sea lanes open, would that weaken the U.S. or would that weaken them? I think it's a question worth asking. Because the question isn't just, what exactly is the Middle East in the middle of anymore? It's, in the land of unforeseen consequences, the only foreseen consequence is that things are going to go badly. That's my feeling on it. Anyway, thanks a lot for stopping in. Please subscribe because the algorithm hates this kind of content and will not show you any more of it. So you have to subscribe to get more. If you don't have time to watch all my amazing videos, you can listen to them on the podcast, which is everywhere. Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, CastBox, everywhere. Thank you very much. We'll see you next time.